students. My name is Elizabeth Curtis. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Economics here at Dartmouth. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of our department to this fall's lecture on inequality, discrimination, and opportunity. I would like to extend a special welcome to all students, including my own, in our Principles of Economics classes who are just beginning their study of the discipline. This lecture series grew out of the Economics Department's commitments to racial justice articulated in June of 2020. The primary purpose of our events is to deepen Dartmouth students' understanding of the role of inequality, discrimination, and opportunity in society, and how economics can increase our understanding of these phenomena and inform policy responses. This now biannual event is co-sponsored with the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center, the Sadie Alexander Association, and the Schoolhouse Anti-Racism Experience. I would now like to turn the microphone over to the co-chair of the Sadie Alexander Association, Shandu Chiuswa, who will introduce today's speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Curtis. Good evening, everyone, faculty, guests, and fellow students. My name is Shandu Chiuswa, and I'm a 24, and I'm an economics major. It is with great pleasure that I have the privilege of introducing this first keynote speaker for the lecture on inequality, discrimination, and opportunity, Dr. William M. Rodgers, who is a Dartmouth economics graduate from the class of 1986. Dr. Rodgers is a renowned figure in the field of economics, labor policy, and social policy, currently serving as the Vice President and Director of the Institute for Economic Equity at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Dr. Rodgers brings a wealth of expertise and experience to the forefront of our discussions on economic equity. Before joining the Federal Reserve, he served as a professor of public policy and the chief economist at the Heldrich Center for Workforce Development at Rutgers University. Throughout his career, he has made significant contributions to our understanding of compensation, pay equity, diversity and inclusions, labor market dynamics, and broader economic trends. But Dr. Rodgers' influence extends beyond academia. He is an elected member of the National Academy of Social Insurance and served as the Academy's board chair for the last 5 years. He also serves as treasurer for the Institute for Women's Policy Research. He is a non-resident fellow at the Century Foundation and has served in labor transition and has served in many public capacities, including on President Obama's Department of Labor Transition Team, and as chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor from 2000 to 2001. As an accomplished author, Dr. Rodgers has contributed valuable insights to the academic world with a book called The Handbook of the Economics of Discrimination. His book was selected by Choice, the review journal of the American Library Association, as an outstanding academic book for 2006. Today, Dr. Rodgers will present 4 compelling economic cases for equity, each offering a unique analytical framework to understand the importance of economic equity. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to have Dr. Rodgers today, and we welcome him to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Give her a hand. Yay. More. Give her more hands. Give her more hands. Yes. Okay. It is so wonderful to be here with you all today, or actually even yesterday. Where do I want to start? I was thinking about how do I want to start this introduction. A little bit more about myself. Not only was I a class of 86, I lived in Sachem Village when I was 5, 6 years old. My father went to Thayer, the engineering school, and I have fond memories of bonfires and tugging in next to my mom's skirt or her slacks because I thought this thing was so big. And then when I get here and see the bonfire, it's like, man, I wasn't that big. But lots of fond memories, and Dartmouth is also very strong within my family. My brother was in '93 here, and then also my cousin finished up the spring right before I came. So this is a place that is very dear to our hearts, dear to our family's hearts. Unfortunately, my daughter went to Columbia. My son went to what I call Maryland's Dartmouth, McDaniel College. And then my youngest son went to Northeastern. So we'll see what happens with their generation. Yeah. Two people I do want to acknowledge that are in the audience today did not know they were going to come, but they both, one particularly has played a major role in my life while I was an undergraduate here, and he actually can tell you some stories that we want to keep quiet. But that's John Engelman. John, please raise your hand. John was our house advisor at AD. Yes, I was in Alpha Delta. But then also, one of my mom's best friends lives here in the area. Eva, please raise your hand. And she always says to me, just like John, they know a lot about me, more than I know that they know about me. But Eva especially has been really supportive over the last few months. My mom had a pretty tough stroke, and my mom is one of the reasons why I'm up here in front of you today. She's a retired social worker. Actually, she wasn't retired. She was still actually, even at 81, out working with young children. And she would come home and she was collapsed because she's so tired. She's like, "What's wrong, Mom?" She says, "I asked them to give me the young ladies, but they keep on giving me these young boys who just have all this energy." But she's the one who can, handles them and works with them. And so, Eba, thank you for coming. Such a wonderful surprise to see you. And if I get choked up a little bit while we're doing the session, please indulge me. I've been on alumni council. I was a class president for several cycles. I also did honorary degree committee. But to be asked to come and deliver an address, to talk with students about your work and the impact you've been doing, that's at another level. And something that I developed early on in my career at William & Mary was I developed a personal mission. Part of it came out of getting some resources to create a little institute that focused on equity issues. But from that work, my personal mission that I've developed, and I hope if you don't have a personal mission, even the faculty here, everybody, you may think about developing that personal mission. And mine, for the last several decades, has been about empowering people and communities with economic thought and analysis. Okay. I could present to you work that measures the gaps or the ratios in unemployment, but that's not what I want to focus on today. What I want to focus on are the narratives that we need to be told. Okay. A lot of my friends who I've worked with in United Way and other nonprofits, many times they're like, "What's the data say? What's the data say? Give us what the data says." And we'll do that. But over time, I've learned to counsel them, say, it's also, you want to be important about the narrative. Like one of the phrases that really just irks me to no end is, what is the data? What does the data tell us? Data doesn't talk. It's one of the things that my mom taught me about. Those are people behind that. Those people are behind those statistics that you comment on, that you're studying about. And they have narratives. Those people have stories. So, for example, why is it important to have a narrative? Many of you may at some point be an executive director of a nonprofit. And what do you have to do? You got to raise money. And hence you're going to need that narrative to be able to justify why you should be getting those funds. Okay. For us faculty and others, adults, right, we have a situation where we may be out at a cocktail party and we get into a conversation with one of our colleagues or friends who you want to shake them, right? I love you, but the way you're thinking about this issue, right, reflects some naivety. Right? For the students, right, that's probably been that 2 o'clock in the morning philosophical conversation about life, right? And you're talking with this person and they're just like going down a path where, again, I love you, but, right? and so a lot of my work and what I want to share with you today is about building those narratives and in the context of how do we improve equity, right? Because the unfortunate thing that's happened, and I don't know if maybe I was naive, but we are engaging in a whole set of conversations locally, statewide, federal level, internationally, right, where there were a whole set of outcomes that at least I thought they were not debatable anymore. Right? I thought they weren't debatable. That these conversations, these debates were done. But and I don't mean to be dropping President Clinton's name, but since it was mentioned in my introduction, I will share a real quick story from doing some work with him. In 2000, we were at a similar point in the business cycle as we are today. Unemployment rates below 4%, not just for a month, but for 12 to 15, 16 months. Right? Amazing prosperity, incomes finally rising, staying ahead of inflation. Right? Unemployment rates for those at the lowest job ladder, on the job ladder, seeing improvements. Well, we at the Labor Department at that time, we decided we were going to give money to communities, grants, for what we called the Youth Opportunity Movement. And these were for communities with high structural levels of poverty. Well, we decided to do this at the White House on a Friday afternoon in April when we set that record with using the president's radio address. Well, we all get herded in. I always forget if it was the East Room or the West Room. Doesn't matter. It was the White House. And President comes in. And I thought he was just going to just come in and give the radio address. But he actually came in and talked for about half an hour. Again, no notes. I'm sure he had thought through this. But still, it was just no notes, perfect sentences, right? Structure, no likes, no uhs, right? All these ands and the connectors, but just fabulous. But one of the things, what he stressed was, he said, let's go back to 1969. At that time, that was the best economy since World War II. And he reminded us, he said, prosperity is not insured. Prosperity is not guaranteed. And the other thing he said was creating prosperity, and particularly widespread prosperity, is hard work. It's really hard work. And then he finished off with that by saying, we took things back to 1969, and he said, 4 months later, after we had celebrated at that time the best economy, we had riots in our cities, we had fires in our streets, we had demonstrations. And so his caution was just, don't get complacent. Right? We can't get complacent about the gains that we've had, because they're not, unfortunately, in many cases, they're not guaranteed. Now, what I should have done, but I don't think I went too far, what I should have done was did my disclaimer. That I'm Bill Rodgers, yes, I'm with the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, but the thoughts and opinions that I share with you just recently and going forward are my thoughts, my views, my feelings, and do not reflect, you know where I'm going with this, do not reflect the policies and the views of the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank or the Federal Reserve System. So you can give me applause for doing that right. All right. So what we're going to do today, and I'm going to try to get through this and so we can have some good time for conversation, I want to share with you some of the narratives that my staff and myself have been building to hopefully provide you and others and the public. Nothing's partisan here. Everything is based upon research. but want to give you some concrete cases for how you can argue for equity, right, that are based upon research, where they could be, you could then possibly use them, right, when you have that 2 a.m. conversation, or now it's 3 a.m. because your friend is still just unrelenting. But also if you are in a position later on that you need to develop these kinds of cases. Another way of also thinking about this is a way I'm just trying to show you how you can use the economics, how you can use your economic training that you're getting, whether it be quantitative, qualitative, whether it be sort of theory-based, but you can utilize it, right, for creating change. In this case, we're doing it in the context of equity. Okay? Sounds good? Cool. All right, let's go. Let's dig in. What I want to do, just in my overview, is I'm going to give you a little bit of a framework for where the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank fits into the whole Federal Reserve System, and in particular, help you see where the Institute for Economic Equity sits. And that's where I'll tell you a little bit more about the Institute. The 4 cases that we're going to talk about, or I'm going to introduce you to, are one, a historical case, and this is going to be delving into using some of the work that Dr. King did back in 1966 in a Nations magazine article that he wrote. We'll then get into what we call the deferred maintenance, or the Fram oil filter commercial. Now, I know all those who are under a certain age, you're going to, who's Fram oil filter? I don't know. I think John, Ebba, maybe some of my other colleagues will know the Fram oil filter commercial. And the simple line in the Fram oil filter commercial now, we'll talk about it in a minute, was you can pay me now or you can pay me later. All right, remember? Okay. That'll become clear as to why that's so important. And then the third case that we're going to introduce you to, I want to introduce you to my sister, Alice. I'm Alice's brother. Alice, and some of you may have heard of Alice already. Alice was created by the United Way of Northern New Jersey. Alice stands for Asset Limited. You want to write this down, students, or type it. Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. Okay? Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. Okay? What we're going to find out is that maybe many of you don't know anybody who's in poverty by the government's definition, but I sure as heck bet you know someone who's Alice. And that's going to be important, that connection that you know Alice. Right? And hopefully that'll change your views, your attitudes about people who are challenged with meeting their monthly needs. And then fourth is going to be a business case for equity. And again, this is all going to be based upon research that we've done. We're not going down that partisan line, but we're just using the economics to help us tell stories about why communities really want to consider pursuing equity. And then finally, we'll close out with a conversation about what are some of the barriers to equity in people's communities. Right? And we're going to talk about not a survey, but a set of roundtables that we did at the St. Louis Fed in our community development function, where we talked to about 16 different communities throughout the 8th districts. And here's another one where I need help from you, and you can show me my love if I get it right. We are a part of the 8th, we're in the 8th district. Okay? There's 12 regional banks. 12 regional banks. St. Louis is the 8th district bank. We cover, here we go, Southern Indiana, Southern Illinois, Western Tennessee, Western Kentucky, Arkansas, Missouri. Arkansas, Missouri. Let me come up. I got Illinois. Oh, Northern Mississippi. So those are our area that we focus on. What do we do in those areas? So you have the Federal Reserve System at the top there, and I just described to you, we have our 12 regional banks. We're the 8th district. Well, at each bank, we do 5 different functions. Okay? The one that you probably are hearing about the most, and you're seeing it in your credit card statements, right, is our efforts to address inflation. Right? How are we doing that? We're using monetary policy by changing the federal funds rate to try to slow inflation down. Okay? So that is the first one, conducting the nation's monetary policy. Okay? We also, in the second one and the third, we also get into what's called supervisory. And I know less about this, but we have a host of employees that are bank examiners that will go out and visit and spend time at banks and making sure that these banks are performing in safe and healthy ways. Where you may have heard about supervisory issues, how many of you remember or heard about Silicon Valley Bank? Okay, that was a case where our supervisory folks heard about this issue, jumped in, and began to really look at what was happening with SVB, but more broadly, even what was happening to banks within your own district. Right? But now, where does Bill Rodgers fit into the Federal Reserve System? We're way over on that far side. Okay? We are a part of that, promoting consumer protection and community development. Okay? That one of the things I love about where I'm at with the Institute and why I chose to go there is that the Institute, instead of being and this is not throwing shade on economics departments and publishing in peer-reviewed journals, but what's neat about the Institute, we're in the community development part of the bank. What does that mean? That explains why I'm here in front of you. That explains why I'm going out to Sonoma, California tomorrow, where I'm going to speak at a community development session there. Okay? That our role in community development is very outward looking. Right? We are out on the pavement, we're talking with people in the communities, we're doing roundtable discussions, we're inviting people to come into the bank and share their wisdom. Last week we had our industry council that met, and I believe there was a healthcare group. And so with monetary policy going on, which is I think our primary focus, but what's happened over the last few years, and again, what attracted me to come to the Fed was the community development, the CD part of the work really intrigued me, because why? Prior to coming to the bank, I thought I was in dress rehearsal in the work I was doing, helping out workers at William & Mary, addressing issues around how black parents are perceived in Williamsburg, helping out the New Jersey governor with regards to some pensions issues. I thought I was really in dress rehearsal, and I view it that way. And now, ever since I've come to the bank, this has been showtime. This is showtime. That we were hit with the pandemic, we had the recovery, we had inflation, we had a variety of natural disasters, right? It's one of these things. I thought I was a pretty creative person, but every day, right, you wake up and it's like, really? That's happening? So being out in the community, and that's what I've loved. And as I said, what's my mission? It's about empowering people and communities with economic thought and analysis. Right? And so let me tell you a little about our institute. We have a fifth researcher coming on board. Our focus is in 3 areas. And and the way we present a lot of our work is in blogs. So my faculty colleagues, if you're looking for stuff to add to your reading list, please come and send your students, because we're trying to get page counts. So anything that's written by Rodgers, please bring it. Yeah. but Lowell and Anna, they're my 2 wealth researchers. They came from a center that predates us, that identified the important role that structural barriers, structural hurdles, right, play in impacting people and families and communities. Do some really great work. Some of their latest work that's caught a lot of attention is around generational wealth, particularly between millennials, Gen X, et cetera. And what our next step is to get them to move into some causal stories. Well, what does this mean for these different generations in terms of how they're going to live? What's going to be their lifestyle? We then have our labor workforce area, and that's kind of been my passion. And yesterday I shared with your faculty colleagues some work that we've been doing on what we call our Vulnerable Workers Initiative. And we've basically we've identified who we think are vulnerable workers, and we've been following them since the pandemic and through the recovery and seeing how they've been doing. Okay. Then our third area, and this is why we're in community development, we have two researchers that focus on community response, community development. And that leads me to our third, how do we do our work? And it was funny here, at least I thought it was funny, or more embarrassing, but I developed this acronym DAN to describe the kind of work we do, where D stands for data, A stands for analysis, N stands for narrative. Well, someone pulled me aside and said, Bill, you remember that your director, his name's Daniel. and I said, I was like got really embarrassed for a moment, and I said, well, I just don't think of him as a Dan. He's a Daniel. They're different names. But what we mean by Dan is we have folks who do a lot of the research on the data. So we actually have a really cool data set that we collect that started off collecting information from nonprofits about how they were being impacted by COVID. Current kinds of questions, but also forward-looking questions. Right? When do you see things getting back to some new normal? Violetta Gutkowski, Nishesh Chalize, they do the work, the data, and the analysis on this survey. Okay. But as I described to you earlier, we're really been big on this narrative piece, right? We really have been big on this narrative piece, whether it be, and that's going to lead into what I'm going to share with you. Just a few more things about the Institute and being in the community development area is we recognize that people are busy. We recognize that not everyone wants to see that technical derivation, even though it's elegant, right? How many of you have been in your theory classes and faculty said, oh, this is so elegant, right? Or even the econometrics, right? Deriving some estimator. This is elegant, or it's intuitive. Do folks use that one? Oh, yeah, you've heard that one, right? It's highly intuitive. Well, clearly it's not, because I'm not getting it, right? But what we do is we try to think of ourselves as translators. Translators. Or another way of phrasing it, we're storytellers. Right? Yes, it's great you're learning all this high-powered econometrics. I mean, by the time I finished my PhD, I'd taken 5 or 6 econometrics courses. And I'm glad I did, because I've been able to use all these different techniques. But don't forget that as you learn all that math, as you learn all that the quantitative and the qualitative types of techniques, at the end of the day, at least the kind of brand of economics I'm doing based upon my mission, what I want to do and the impact I want to do, we're storytellers. We're storytellers. And we do care about t-statistics, right, being above a certain value. We do care about identification, right? We don't, but the bottom line is we feel ourselves, we are translators. Okay? What does that mean? That means with our economic equity, our insights blog, we take a study that's been done by one of our fellows or a colleague who's presented in our seminar series. They work with staff members, crunch it down to a piece that's about 800 to 1,000 words that's written in a way, right, that folks on Main Street, right, can use. Or translator is, I've been having something I would call conversations on equity. And in real time, it's a conversation with a leading scholar or practitioner about an equity issue. But for me, it's really, I'm also planning for my retirement. I've always had this fun desire to be a talk show host. And so we have coming up, we have Rick McGahee, a colleague of mine from the New School, who's going to talk about cities and the role that, what the challenges cities face. But the bottom line, one of the words I want you to take away with is this translator idea. Is this translator idea that you have a whole host of people who just don't have the time or the expertise, right, to read a full 25-page journal article, but they are very fascinated and want to be told, or here's the consolidated version of that, to help them make decisions. And that's the other thing too. I want you to make a distinction between, begin to make a distinction between outputs, and what do you think the next word's going to be? Outputs versus, now you got your production function thing going on here. Outcomes. Okay, outputs versus outcomes. Where outputs will be, oh, we published 30 blogs this year. Cool, right? But did we change how people are living? Did we change how the NAACP is making decisions? That's where we want to be. And we're 2 years into our work, and we're starting to get that kind of feedback that, Bill, thank you for you and your staff's work, that it is influencing how we can have a conversation. Right? It is influencing, right, or adding in some new insights or new ideas to help people, right, see. But also the way we communicate is what motivates or creates this ability to get these kind of comments back. Right. So that's where we sit within CD. And one of the cool things that's been happening is there's been a move within the system to incorporate more community development conversations in the Federal Open Market Committee conversation. So like this Thursday, I'll be briefing our bank president about some of the work I shared with you yesterday, and helping her develop her and craft her statement and view on what the St. Louis Fed thinks we should do with regards to interest rate policy. Okay? So we're excited. All right, let's dive into these various cases, and I'm going to go through them really quickly so we can have some. I do want to have some ample time for us to talk, or to dialogue. What do we mean by the historical case for equity? Well, simply put, what Dr. King had done, he'd written this piece in The Nation in 1966, and one of his premises was this statement of that jobs are harder to create than voting rolls. Jobs are harder to create than voting rolls. Now, today, there are places, I'm not going to mention states or places, but there are places, right, that you might challenge me and say this isn't the case. But what Dr. King did was he collected all these different indicators. Okay? We're back in 1966, from income to looking at hiring and firing patterns, to seeing what happens to layoff patterns, who loses their jobs first. Right? And all of these indicators, he found that, particularly at that pace, and even 1966 the economy was still pretty good. But even in that improving economy, you still found that blacks were disadvantaged in all these different indicators. Well, what happens if you go to today, or more recently, and redo those indicators? And this is where I put my faculty hat back on and I may cold call on someone if someone doesn't say anything. What do you think those indicators look like today? Similar, right? Yeah. There's been some gains, some improvement, and yes, because of this amazing recovery that we've had after COVID, particularly the last 16 months or so, yes, there's been a relative improvement, absolute relative improvement, but still, it is still accurate to say that in many cases, black Americans today are at a status where they were back in 1979. It is still okay to say the research suggests that if you incorporate justice involved, if you incorporate some of these other decisions around not being in the labor force, the relative status of black Americans takes you back to 1966 when he wrote this article. Case number one. Number two, I said it's the Fram oil filter commercial. How many of you have heard of something called human priority investments? Anybody? It's a UN concept. But it's basically a community's public investments in human capital, but not only human capital, but social capital. What would constitute a social capital investment? Social Security, unemployment insurance, TANF. Let's go a little more local. Education, community centers. And what I found when I look at our investment in these human priorities since World War II, we end up getting 3 periods where we've been under investing as relative to the trend. So picture sort of this is a trend relative to GDP of how we've been investing as a society in public in these human priority investments. There are 2 main periods where we've fallen below trend. And this is where some people will say, well, Bill, you say you're not being political, but you really are. Here's where I will fall back and think, well, I'm just telling you what the data says. But that one period is the 1980s. Okay. As a share of GDP, we fell below what you would have predicted we would be spending on. And then the other period is now. Okay. The other period is now. What happened during the 1980s in terms of income inequality? That was a period where we began to see expansion. And there's been a lot of literature that talks about why we saw that expansion. Before I talk about the current period, we've had 2 periods now where we were above trend. Guess when would you think those 2 periods were? Something called the Great Recession, and then most recently, fighting the pandemic. You see, we jump we jump above trend. But what's happened is, since the last few years, year or two, we've fallen now below trend. Why am I concerned? Well, if you believe there's a causal relationship between our slowdown in investment in human priorities, and that then gets linked, it can be causally related to growing income inequality, right? We may have just also sowed the seeds for a new period of growth in income inequality, right? Even though we're right now in a relatively good spot. Okay? The pandemic, it increased our awareness, right, about the need to expand infrastructure. But the cool thing about it wasn't just infrastructure, roads and bridges. Okay? One of the new, let's call it modern supply-side economics that I really have embraced, and I think it frames our work really well, and a large part of that is about investing in people. To do what? To be more productive. And if you add productivity and population growth together, what do you get? Economic growth. Sounds like a good thing, right? But we've also, through the pandemic, right, we learned that these human priority investments need to also go beyond just bridges and roads, that we need to talk about social capital, that we need to talk about mental health. Okay? Here's my one plug about hopefully you're taking care of your mental health. I've been practicing yoga for the last 10 years. I'm an instructor. I'm not going to tell you where I practice that because then you think, oh, he's trying to do a shameless plug for his folks. But wherever you go, yoga, but movement is medicine. Okay? Movement is medicine. Keep moving. All right. Well, yeah, and one of the things that frustrates me about this conversation, right, is that yes, these investments have cost, but they also have, you can read my slide, returns. They have economic returns, and that they can potentially raise productivity and enhance economic growth. Okay? So, case number 2. I told you I was going to introduce you to my sister Alice. Okay? Alice stands for, as I said, we can do it again, asset limited, income constrained, and employed. It was a concept created by the United Way of Northern New Jersey a number of years ago, and basically Alice is of all ages. So let's see how this works. We haven't rehearsed it, so this could fall flat, but let's try it. How many of you know, raise your hands if you know someone who's in poverty by the government definition? Okay, good. Now, Alice are families and households who don't have enough income to make ends meet, to meet a survival budget. Okay? Who are some of these people? These are probably some of your cafeteria servers. These are the waiters and waitresses. These are maybe your teachers in your community. These are firefighters, first responders. Right? How many people know someone in that situation? Okay, cool. Are they lazy? Right, not at all. Because what's the key thing here? Because you know them. That to me seems a really key connection. You know these people. Right? They're not too far differently from people who are in poverty by the government's definition. Okay. But a lot of times, what do? We let our language slip, and we think that, oh, those people are in poverty, right? They're lazy. So one of the things, like, we can take off this laziness explanation, right, and appeal to more like structural types of changes. Okay. Another thing I might ask you is like about race, and we're going to look at some estimates of what ALICE looks like. So in the U.S., the overall ALICE population is about 41% of households. This is in 2021, and it hasn't come down. Okay. You go to New England, on the hand, the median across all the states is about 39%. Where are the highest or the elevated ALICE populations? It's in the South Atlantic, East, South, Central, so several of these southern states. Mississippi, 51%. 1 in 2 households in Mississippi cannot meet their base budget. And this is just breaking out New England for you, showing the variation. Okay. And you can see Mississippi, it's 52%. Okay. 51% in Louisiana. Okay. All right. But this is the money chart. This is what I really, when I talk about the cases for equity, what I spend really most of my time on, and I helped to develop this chart. And basically what you have here, each row corresponds to a budget item for ALICE. So her housing, her child care. Next slide has food, clothing. Well, the first column is the duh column that most people get. And that just shows you what are the impacts on ALICE, her family, or her household, if she doesn't have access to these items. But the really important column, from a standpoint of helping change, helping to be an advocate, helping to tell the story, Alice's story, and the impacts of Alice's story, such that you may motivate people to change their behavior or modify their behavior or soften their views, right, is that second column, the impact on everybody. Simply put, if Alice hurts, we all hurt. Okay. Economically, that's what I focus on the most here, but we all hurt. Possible if they don't have good housing, they potentially reduce land values in the community. Right. If they don't have good child care, right, there's been a lot of great work by Jim Heckman and others, economists, talking about the importance of early childhood experiences. Okay. Right. We can look at food, we can look at transportation, but the key thing here is, what do those all track back to? Q over L, what's that? Oh, no, oh my gosh. Do I need to put the dot up there too? What is it? What's output relative to labor? What is that? What's that measure? Say it. Productivity, yes! That's right. Productivity. And what is productivity a key ingredient of? Economic growth. Right? Last case, and we'll buzz through this. This is a business case that we've developed to articulate, right, that if a community were to pursue economic equity, these could be the potential gains to that community if you were to pursue it. And what we're doing here is comparing the black is what I call the actual buying power, so the actual disposable income in the community. And then the red bar is the potential. Okay? And so what does this mean? Is that basically if you weight, it's a very simple estimate. The San Francisco Fed has some estimates, national estimates, and mine, and it's great. They're more formal with their work, but my estimates, and their estimates actually are pretty similar. What are we saying here? Well, we're saying take the buying power that is estimated for blacks, the black bar, weight it by the income ratio, the income differences between blacks and whites. Okay? Or yes, that's right. And what that jumps out at you is that the buying power, actual buying power, once you weight for the differences in incomes between blacks and whites, that's a source of about $976 billion in terms of buying power. But if you were to move to parity between black and white households with their incomes, now that jumps, the red bar, that jumps up to about 1.6 trillion, right, dollars in buying power. What we're really interested in, you can see for Latinos we do it, and we do it for Native Americans, but what we're really interested in is that change. Right? That's disposable income that we estimate that would come into the U.S. economy. Okay? Now you're saying, is that big, small? Could be a context. We take those amounts I just showed you and weight them by, or deflate them, or divide by GDP. And so what you can do is you can then think about 3% either as that's what would cost the community to possibly, right, pursue equity, right? And so then you could say, wow, 3% is not. I mean, that's not that much, right? Why are we sitting on our hands? As Dr. King said, he said, did it in a perplexed way of why are white business owners willing to let inequity continue? They're leaving profits on the table. The next step that we did then was, can we help out some of those industries? Like sort of send a signal to some of the industries and say, well, here's how much profit or disposable income that you could be having access to that you're leaving on the table. And so what we do is we go to the Consumer Expenditure Survey, where we have estimates of shares and what people spend, and housing, right, is one of the largest shares that people spend their finances on, their money on, and then you can see for transportation and other areas. And these are, I think, they're non-trivial estimates. Okay, let's move on. This is showing you for Latinos, okay, similar kinds of estimates. Here's just showing you we're able to do these estimates not only at the national, state, but we can go down to the metro area. And so this is showing you, so like for Boston, it's about $7 billion in additional disposable income that would come into the community. And that's only like 1.6% of their local GDP. So again, it's large in a sense, but then from a standpoint of if you thought about this as a cost to do this, right? Not that big. So we have to remove these barriers to work. Here these are some summary thoughts about that come from our recent roundtable discussions with our stakeholders in our community, in our 8th district. And the 4 groups that these people cited as being still not working, right? Still not being fully tapped in terms of their potential are a set of young adults, and the concerns, the reasons range from, there seems to be a preference for gig work, we're going to check that out, but mental health comes up very strong, and that's consistent with some of the other work that we've been doing at the Institute. Parents, particularly moms with young children, facing challenges with child care. People with a disability also having challenges, and then the justice-involved group. Right? There are some other groups, but these were the 4 that really stood out. So let me just summarize, and then we can quickly get into the conversation. But basically what I wanted to show you is our efforts to build these cases for economic equity. Okay? Hopefully some of the information is useful for you, or even just seeing this process, seeing how you can use your statistics and you can use economic theory to generate these stories. That hopefully that's a good takeaway. That's a takeaway for you also. In terms of content-wise, what we find is that states and metro areas with the biggest gains, they have two of the following. Either they have the biggest household income differences between blacks and whites, and then also regardless of race and ethnicity, they have larger ALICE populations. So that's another thing I want you to take away is this idea of ALICE. Is what they've done is they've gone out and now have a state, not every state has them, but they've been developing these for a variety of states. How do we continue to keep this economy going? One is, as my old boss, the Labor Secretary Alexis Herman says, we have a skills shortage and not a worker shortage. Okay? We have a skills shortage and not a worker shortage. And so a lot of our work needs to be focusing on investing in those human priorities, investing in skills and competencies, investing in helping people balance work and caring for their family, creating safe and fair workplaces, and then also promoting financial inclusion. Many of you have heard of food deserts, right? There are banking deserts. Right? And one of our projects that we're working on is trying to help people understand that and reduce those banking deserts. So some questions for you all, particularly the students, to think about going forward. How do we pursue equity? One answer is increasing access to work and consumption, but then that leads to those three following questions, right? One, how do we ensure that workers have the skills and health care that provide lifelong economic security? Two, how do we accommodate workers' needs to balance their jobs and their caring for their families? And then three, how do we ensure that all workers have opportunities in America's workforce, that our diverse population works in safe and fair workplaces? Just real basic questions. All right. Thank you very much, and again, it's really very humbling. You don't know, it's hard to describe, but it's very humbling to be in front of you and have this opportunity, so thank you. Thank you. Looking to increase our page counts, our hits on our slides. We've got opportunity here, and then just we don't want to go there, but then we'll leave that up. Just direct you to the St. Louis Fed. So.
I think we have time for some questions. I don't know, if we have a mic to float around in the drawer?
Oh, well, we'll start here. Yeah. Sorry.
I think I'm going to give you the mic.
Maintenance of human priorities, because as you said, we can develop. Can you speak in the mic? Oh yes. So my question was, do you think tech expansion and expansion of AI have been contributing to deferred maintenance of human priorities post COVID?
Yeah. That's a great question, and that actually is a project that we're moving into working on and actually stepping back from AI, but focusing even on robotics. A lot of that research, that's the challenge with that research, is that when they show these employment effects, they're net effects. And just as you all know from your micro theory, here's where the theory can be a guidance, right? That's a net effect. It can be broken up into what? A substitution effect and a productivity effect, right? An output effect. So what we're going to be doing is we have some data from a called Link Up, where we have job openings down to the zip code, and then we also have some estimates of robot penetration into various communities at the metro area, and we're going to look and see if how much do you see a change in the job postings for the jobs that were very labor intensive. Right, occupations were labor intensive versus how much of it now we need. We're searching for a technician to work with the robot, and so I'm teasing up another reason why you got to invite me back. Okay, but it's a great question. I think on the AI, that's something that's much more recent, and the human priority concern, it's been an issue for a longer period of time.
I have another question.
Yep.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your time and the lecture. It was amazing. And my question is, you've outlined the importance of economic equity, not just for the vulnerable populations like Latinos or African Americans, but for the healthy growth of the economy in America. But from your work at the Institute of Economic Equity, can you provide any insights into how central banks and institutions prioritize equity while also balancing other macroeconomic objectives like the ones you mentioned?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Everybody hear that? Right? And I think my quick answer for you is we have a dual mandate, and that dual mandate is about stable prices and maximum employment. Well, a number of years ago, it was before I came, and one reason why I decided to come to the bank is there's now a willingness to talk about race. There's now a willingness to talk about ethnicity. There's now a much stronger willingness to talk about gender, right? And inequity. And I think so the challenge, right, that people have been raising for us is that if we have this dual mandate of wanting to pursue, right, stable prices and maximum employment, right, it's inconsistent with my buddy Bill Spriggs, who's came and has spoken to you all. He talks very passionately about that the black unemployment rate is twice that of the white unemployment rate, regardless of where you are in the business cycle, right? It's inconsistent with the dual mandate, meeting the dual mandate, particularly on the employment side, when you have certain groups that are like women are earning 25% still to this day less than men. You can go on and identify these persistent gaps that at least that I've come, and I think more of my colleagues are saying that are inconsistent with, right, pursuing the dual mandate. And so that's where the community development function that we are doing becomes much more important. And we're seeing slow change with regards to being a part of the FOMC conversations. But there's also other ways that we pursue equity now, instead of just saying it's something that the Congress has to do. I mean, they still have to do that, but we're revising what's called our Community Reinvestment Act. That should be coming out revision should be coming out soon, and the tenor of that will continue to be with its mission for what it was created in the 80s, and that is making sure that communities have access to capital, have access to resources to be able to grow wealth and invest. So, thanks. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that...
Started with a so. Oh, dear. Uh-oh. My daughter does so dad. so hope he doesn't throw you off. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that part of your job and really the whole thing is consolidating your research into creating a narrative. So while I understand how necessary that is, I'm just wondering how you can effectively consolidate people's experiences without letting people eventually, fall through the cracks with, if they fall outside of this, general findings or things like that.
So, restate your questions. I was with you, and then let's say fall out.
That's okay. So in creating a narrative,
yes,
how do you ensure that people don't fall through the cracks, right? How do you prevent overgeneralizing people's experiences?
Yeah, and that's why you see, if you come to the presentation or the seminar yesterday, you will see that, at least in our economic vulnerability, we have basically 3 or 4 indicators, and that if you score below these certain indicators, such as your wages are below some benchmark, if your employment population ratio, that's the share of the civilian population that's got a job, if that's below some, again, benchmark, we would then start to identify you as being a vulnerable worker or a vulnerable community. And that list is very long. And as I present, like I was presenting at Brandeis a couple months ago, and some of the young students, grad students there, are like, Professor Rodgers, you need to put immigrants on there. So this is what I also call real-time research. That's another neat thing about being at this institute. It is that, yes, we do publish some peer-reviewed journal articles, but a lot of our work it's about our mandate of being responsive to communities. So you saw also, too, I showed you some of the research from our little roundtables. So we do try to be as inclusive as possible. And a large part, and there's a big appendix set here. I didn't think that would be appropriate to show you 30 charts. So, but your question is very, very important. Right? Yeah, there's a trade-off, and we're trying to balance that. Yeah. Maybe over here. Yeah.
I'm loud enough that I don't need the mic. I've taught economics here for 40-some years, and one of the things I taught were the benefits of international trade in the introductory course. And after a while, the benefits of international trade, I always thought everybody benefits. But you start looking under the covers and you find out that not everybody benefits. There are some groups, some places where they're not so great. I like your program. I think I'm tempted to go the international trade route and say everybody benefits. But tell us a little bit about the people who may not benefit from this program.
You have a host of people that will not benefit if we don't make the investments, if we don't remove these various structural barriers that they face. And that's partly why I showed folks yesterday for a lot of these groups that even in this tight period, so this period for the last 16 months where we've had an unemployment rate at or below 4%. We've been at around 3.8, 3.7, 3.5. And there have been relative gains for some of these, for many of these groups, but there still are sizable differences, right? Which to me is all about, and why our institute exists. It's all about trying to shine a light on the role that structural barriers, structural hurdles. Pick your thought or your solution, but that they hamper things. One question for you. So no one has asked us, why equity versus equality? Why didn't you call it the Institute for Economic Equality? Yeah. We have a microphone. I'm sorry. Hurry, come on, go ahead.
One thing that comes to mind when you use the terms equity versus equality is equity is looking at everybody as the same. And once you take a policy approach, it's like we're going to target everybody the same way without taking into account of like where they are. So for example, like creating a policy that targets everyone exactly the same way, regardless of like what income bracket you fall in. Whereas equity focuses on like those individual subsets of groups to ensure that like the benefits that you're trying to create or like the goals that you're trying to accomplish are targeting the individuals who need that rather than like trying to address everybody as a whole.
Equality would be giving everybody the same solution, right? Where equity is, we're figuring out, okay, what do we need to provide the efforts to get you above some level, to get you to be above the Alice threshold. Exactly. Response to this, or you got another? So maybe we go back over here, or this gentleman, try to balance it out. So, but while we're doing that, there's a great set of graphics that are out there that make the distinction between equality and equity. The one that I like to use is these three young men. They're outside. It's like a backyard baseball game, but there's a very short fellow who can't see over the fence, and then you have another fellow who can just see, who's like right at the top of the fence, and then you have a person who's above. Equality would be giving everybody the same stool. Equity is giving each other what they need to be successful. Yeah.
I have a quick question. We've talked about.
You have a good question?
A quick question.
Quick question.
We've talked about.
All questions are good.
We've talked about public investments in people, like government should provide X, Y, Z. But I'm curious about why private institutions should also be involved. Well, first, should they be involved? How should they be involved? And why should they be involved? And I know you talked about this a little bit with when people are happier, they are more productive, and the institutions benefit, but just want to know where they fit into the matrix.
Yeah, I mean, I think one reason why the private sector needs to be involved is, as I shared here, if you buy my results, they're leaving profits on the table. Right? Another reason why I think the private sector will need to up its ante and be involved is my sense, and this is my looking in the crystal ball, that the ARPA funds that we saw recently to really save the economy, those are going to be the largest injections of public dollars that communities are going to receive, at least over the rest of my lifetime. And so if we're going to make a dent or solve many of these problems, right, it's not only going to be just the third sector, that's the sort of nonprofit world, but you're also going to need businesses, the private sector, to be participating in making investments. And that's why I showed you my business case, my economics case, right? Because I've presented this stuff to CEOs who will come in there initially skeptical, and in the end I got them like, what, sign me up, coach. Figure out what can we be doing. So those are two quick thoughts or answers to your question, why it's so important.
We are we are a little over time, so we're going to take one last question.
And I'll hang out here
pressure.
for a little. I'll hang out here for a little bit to answer student questions. So if you want to. Yeah.
Well, the mic is coming.
You mentioned your work in community development and the importance of that. Do you have any advice as a Dartmouth alum for current Dartmouth students who are interested in pursuing, public policy and like that type of industry? What some sort of tips are?
Oh, as I started off, I think number one is developing that personal mission, and this is for anybody. But I became much more comfortable and confident about what I was doing once I developed that personal mission, as opposed to my brother, who's an investment banker from Morgan Stanley. But it's nice where he can just stroke a check to help address these issues. But he's also he had a kind of come here moment where he said, he actually asked me, so what can I do to make a difference? I've done well, and now how can I make a difference? Or my cousin, who's a lawyer, Harvard-trained lawyer, brilliant guy, but he's also kind of got to a place where I want to give back. But to specifically, I think it's one, think about what are the tools you need, right? What is nice about sort of going that public policy route. We didn't have public policy schools when I was your age. So I had to go to an economics department, and the curriculum's different. Like when I teach in the public policy school, the curriculum's quite different, but tools still are very important. I think having those advocates around that will help you get those internships or get those opportunities to be a research assistant or to be with an organization. What else too? I talk with folks about. And they come back to the mission, but having that passion. Like one of the things I really love about being at the Federal Reserve is that even though we're actually Federal Reserve banks, the regionals, we're not federal employees, but we have a very, very strong mission. We're very mission-oriented. And I think and I can share with you, I've been very blessed in not having a lot of roadblocks thrown in front of me. But when they do come, just make the hit. Figure out, okay, let me recalibrate. How do I go around? And then just keep pushing. And then folks next to you, behind you, folks who aren't here, these are your advocates. And that's one of the beautiful things about the Dartmouth tradition, is that you're pursuing and becoming a part of a family that is, again, I look at you, this is a very different audience composition from when I was here. This almost looks like my Rutgers experience of teaching there. So you take advantage of that fact that you all are in a much more diverse place, and so you have people have different ideas, different passions, different priorities, and just be receptive. Because if you had asked me 20 years ago, would I be standing in front of you and doing this conversation? I said maybe. But we can talk more afterwards, but those are some quick thoughts for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.